Today we have a crazy revenge story on somebody who was hogging the gym. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, got fired, reported them to OSHA, and destroyed a family business and made them leave town. So a while back, I had been hired to be the marketing person for a family business. It was a fitness equipment liquidator that had been founded by a gold medalist Olympian. He had fallen into some mental health issues and had delegated his wife to take over the business. She didn't have the experience but took the reins anyways, and she and her children ran the place, albeit with some success. So this is where I come in. The first red flag I should have seen was that she was trying to screw over the recruiter by wanting us to do a side deal to pay me technically less, but still more than I would have gotten without the recruiter as the middle person. But I was in bed and I didn't think too much about it. The next thing was how embedded the family aspect was in this business, that there was basically no distinction between the employees and family affairs being wrapped up in their work environment too. But I was just happy to finally be in a space where I felt welcome and almost love-bombed by the CEO who treated me like one of her own children. Always lots of hugs and even kisses during good morning meetings as if we were coming downstairs for breakfast. Meetings ended up turning into brainstorming sessions because the CEO's children and the workers were so scatterbrained and didn't want to commit to any specific plans of action. And I was basically on my own when it came to any marketing of anything because nobody would actually participate if it came down to it. About a month or so into it, I get ambushed by the CEO and her daughter, who was like the operations person technically or something. Both were wondering why we hadn't achieved as much as I'd wanted to, and when I explained that I didn't really receive much help or participation from anyone, suddenly it became all about blaming me for everything wrong, and why sales were down and why nothing was exponentially growing as she had hoped they would. I explained what actions I'd taken and that I was doing exactly what I said I was going to do. It wasn't my fault nobody wanted to help when they said they would. It didn't matter. They wanted me gone because they expected the moon in 3 weeks' time with zero budget and zero help from anyone else, so I just left. I want to add that I did a lot while there. I automated a lot of their processes that they were doing by hand, set up Salesforce and Slack, as well as setting up and handling Zendesk and a ticketing system, and even automating a lot of point-of-sale processes so that from card tab to accounting, it was all smooth and seamless, and I made tons of things very efficient for them and improved productivity while there. But none of that mattered, of course. They wanted double the sales from basically social media posting and nothing else. While I was there, I had documented tons of OSHA violations, exposed wires where customers would walk, ADA violations, customer safety violations, forklifts operated with zero certification and no PPE, and having employees standing on top of the forks just to reach the warehouse ceiling with no safety anything. Structural violations, you name it, they did it. Landlord special type fixes and left things in often worse states than before. I made the call and sent OSHA photos of what I documented, which I'd only documented in the event of needing to use it. Never actually expected it to come to that, but it did. After talking with them, it was explained to me that there was months-long processes to get actions to be taken, even with evidence. The penalties for the violations I had evidence for were financially crippling fines I knew they wouldn't be able to handle, and after months of checking every now and then, I got confirmation action was taken. Then a couple months later, I drove past the warehouse/showroom and saw that it was abandoned. Broken letters, overgrown grass in the parking lot, boarded up windows and doors, for lease, all gone and dilapidated. While I was placing those calls, I was also reaching out to my realtor friend who is super good at what she does, saying that we should time it right so that after these fines and penalties that she can drop literature off at their door until they're convinced to sell. She didn't do it in time, but she did catch wind that the house had been sold and sold fast. Their website was 404'd and they basically packed their bags and left. I still can't believe it worked, but sometimes in life, we have to accept that we are the karma that someone has coming to them. Goodbye, Amy. Wherever you and your family left to, we're even. I just find it funny that you could say technically this fitness equipment liquidator was a very unhealthy business. Maybe if they worked out a little bit more, it wouldn't have gone belly up. Our next story is, you can't ruin my life and have a good one. High school in my country starts at 15 and lasts 3 years, but I got in a year early at 14. I felt out of place right from the start. Most of the other students were older, taller, and more confident. I was shy, unsure of myself, and trying hard to fit in. Being the youngest in class wasn't easy. The older kids either treated me like a baby or ignored me altogether. That's when Connor showed up. Connor was different. He was 17, tall, and always had this easygoing smile that made everyone feel at ease. He had this way of making you feel special, like you were the only person in the room. He talked to me like I mattered, asking me about my favorite things and actually listening to my answers. It felt nice to have someone notice me, especially someone older who seemed so cool and confident. We started spending more time together, and before I knew it, we were dating. It all happened so fast that I barely had time to think. He would bring me little snacks like chocolate or chips and say things like, "You're so mature for your age." It made me feel grown up and important, like I was finally part of the crowd. At first, everything seemed perfect, but little things didn't sit right. Connor would get annoyed if I wanted to hang out with my friends instead of him. He would say it was because he cared about me so much, but it felt off. Sometimes I noticed the way the other students looked at him. It wasn't admiration, it was something else. Something harder to pin down. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. Looking back, I should have paid attention to those signs. The jokes he made about girls being easy to control weren't funny. The way he always wanted to know where I was or who I was talking to wasn't caring, it was controlling. But I didn't see it back then. I was just happy to have someone who made me feel special. Little did I know, my relationship with Connor would turn into a nightmare. At first, dating Connor felt like living a dream. He was older, charming, and seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel special, but as the weeks went by, things started to change. The little compliments that once made me smile became backhanded remarks. "You looked better when you wore that other dress," he'd say casually, making me second-guess myself. It didn't stop there. Connor always had a way of getting what he wanted, and he didn't take no for an answer. If I told him I didn't feel like hanging out, he would sulk or guilt me until I gave in. "I guess you don't care about us as much as I thought," he'd mutter, staring at the ground. I hated the way it made me feel, so I would apologize even when I hadn't done anything wrong. Then came the pressure. Connor was obsessed with doing it, and he made sure I knew it. "You're so mature for your age," he'd say. "I don't get why you're holding back." Every time I tried to set boundaries, he'd find a way to make me doubt myself. He'd whisper things like, "Don't you love me?" or "You'll regret it if you don't." One night, after weeks of wearing me down, I gave in. I told myself it was what couples do, that maybe I was the one being childish. But the moment it happened, Connor changed. He pulled away, acting distant and cold. A few days later, he broke up with me. I was devastated, but that wasn't the end. Connor didn't disappear from my life. Instead, he found ways to stay close, showing up uninvited or cornering me when no one else was around. Each time, he made it worse. He used every trick in the book to manipulate me, making me believe I wanted things I didn't. For 3 long years, Connor had his way with me more times than I can count. I felt trapped, ashamed, and utterly powerless. The worst part? I didn't even realize how bad it was until much later. At 17, I hooked up with someone else, someone who respected my boundaries. That's when it hit me. What Connor had done wasn't normal. It wasn't love. It wasn't even close. Connor's behavior wasn't limited to me. In our second year, he crossed a line I couldn't ignore. My best friend had met Connor at a party one Friday night while we were still dating. I didn't go because I was either too tired or found an excuse to escape his presence for a while. It was one of those casual gatherings where everyone knew someone but no one knew everyone. He was charming, in that effortless way some people are. He laughed at her jokes, remembered little things she said, and seemed genuinely interested in her stories. They had mutual friends, so when he offered to walk her home, she wasn't suspicious. Why would she be? He'd been polite all evening, and his easygoing demeanor made him seem harmless. But appearances can be deceiving, right? What started as a friendly walk quickly turned dark. She told me how it happened. How his hand lingered too long when he touched her arm, how his jokes shifted to something crude, and how she started to feel uneasy. She tried to laugh it off to diffuse the tension, but Connor wasn't laughing anymore. He forced himself on her in a quiet alley just minutes from her house. She froze, too shocked and terrified to fight back. When it was over, he left her there, trembling and broken. She didn't tell me immediately. She didn't tell anyone. Weeks later, after I'd broken up with the sorry excuse of a human being, she confessed to me I could barely recognize her. The bright, confident girl I knew was now a shadow of herself, carrying a pain no one should ever have to bear. Looking back, it's hard to explain how I let it go on for so long, but when you're in the middle of it, it's like being in a fog. You tell yourself it'll get better, that maybe it's your fault, that maybe this is just how relationships work. It took me 3 years to see the truth, but once I did, there was no turning back. Connor had ruined too many lives, and I knew he had to face the consequences. It wouldn't hurt that I helped ensure it. When we were in our 3rd year of high school, Connor thought he had everyone fooled. But I knew better. I also knew exactly which universities he applied for. Connor wasn't careful with his belongings, and one day I snooped in his bag and found his application numbers. It wasn't hard to figure out what to do next. Using those numbers, I contacted every university on his list. I explained the situation to them clearly and provided screenshots of the vile conversation he had with my best friend. In those messages, he threatened her with a defamation case if she pressed charges against him. She had sent me those messages long ago when she was venting her frustration, and I'd kept them. At the time, I didn't know why I'd held on to them, but now I did. The universities didn't hesitate to thank me for the information. They assured me they would not admit someone with such a dangerous background. True to their word, Connor was rejected from every single university he applied to. He had no choice but to repeat his 3rd year at our high school, a place where everyone already knew what he had done. Even worse for him, the incoming first-year students were quickly warned about his reputation. The following year, I'd already graduated and wasn't around to interfere with his applications. This time, Connor managed to get accepted into a university I hadn't contacted before. For a moment, I thought he had slipped through the cracks. Unfortunately for him, I found out where he had been accepted, and I wasn't about to let him escape accountability. I repeated the process, sending the same screenshots and evidence to his new university. But this time, I didn't have to act alone. Former students from our high school were already attending that university, and they wasted no time speaking up. They went straight to the university's mental health center, sharing stories about Connor's inappropriate behavior and warning them about the rumors surrounding him. Thanks to the proof I had provided, the university took their claims seriously. Connor was permanently expelled, not just for his actions but for the safety of all the female students on campus. With no degree and nowhere else to go, Connor's life began to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. Desperate to escape his reputation, Connor decided to move to another region where no one would recognize him. He passed a diploma program that qualified him to work with children, thinking he could start fresh. Unfortunately for him, Connor couldn't resist oversharing on social media. He proudly announced that he had earned his diploma and landed a job as an educator for troubled kids and preteens. What Connor didn't know was that I'd been keeping tabs on him. I'd even created a fake social media account pretending to be one of his only remaining acquaintances from high school, someone I knew was chronically offline and wouldn't blow my cover. Through this account, I followed his updates closely. With a bit of digging, I found out where he was working. I reached out to his new workplace and repeated the same process I'd used before. This time, I included an extra piece of evidence, a voicemail Connor had left me years ago. In it, he was panting as he told me how hot I was at the age of 14 and how he wished he could go back in time just to do those things again. That voicemail sealed the deal. His employer acted swiftly, firing him on the spot out of concern for the children's safety, but the fallout didn't end there. Apparently, his previous workplace took additional action to ensure Connor could never work with children again. I don't know how they managed it, but according to Connor's social media, they got him blacklisted on a national level, effectively invalidating his diploma. With no job prospects, Connor couldn't afford his rent and ended up homeless for a while. Eventually, his mother allowed him to move back in with her, but even that came at a cost. I'm friends with Connor's older sister who knows everything about what he did and what I've done to ensure he faces the consequences. She didn't hold back in sharing the truth with the rest of her family. From what she's told me, everyone cut ties with both Connor and their mother. His mother's decision to support him isolated her from the family just as much as his actions had isolated him. As for me, I still keep an eye on Connor's social media, checking occasionally to see if he's trying to get back on his feet. Last time I checked was today, right before writing this. Connor's life is a wreck. He R-worded 2 people and has paid dearly for it. He's isolated socially and estranged from his family. As long as I'm alive, there's no chance he'll ever have a girlfriend. He's stuck in the same region where he went to high school, where no one will hire him, not even as a cleaner. There were even nights when he's had to sleep on the streets. Honestly, it's a miracle no one's tried to physically harm him. Considering everything he put me and my best friend through, it's surprising that he hasn't faced more direct consequences, but then again, that's not my style. Go to heck, Connor. Trust me when I say you'll have to wait for me to die before even thinking about starting to have a normal life. I completely understand that some people may not want to involve the legal process in this. They may not want to have to, for better or worse, essentially recount their experience in graphic detail. That said, I definitely agree with OP that this guy should have been held so much more accountable than just having somebody check in on their life and make sure that no employer is going to keep this guy around. That said, our next story is stop hogging in the gym. Everyone goes to the gym for different reasons, and if you don't have a private gym of your own, you have to find a way to tolerate the weirdest and craziest gym bros you would come across, regardless of gender. So usually, the gym was a madhouse, especially at the peak hours when people packed themselves in the gym trying to reach their goals for the day and move on to the job that pays their bills. You would hear the machines loudly as one person left them for another. It was really a game of Fast and Furious most of the time. One thing that made it energetic was the track list. Of course, you had the choice of plugging your ears to listen to your own groove while you worked, but there was something about the unexpected songs that you anticipated from the gym speakers. So it was nice. Even with the chaos of the gym, having a place I was familiar with to lift weights and break sweat was nice. And I wasn't one to be among the show-off popular people in the gym. You know, those types of guys that came around and wanted the entire gym to pause and watch them do their thing. Yeah, I wasn't like that. Maybe it was because I wasn't as good as they were, carrying massive weights and all, or maybe it was because I hate unnecessary attention from a large population. I followed each rule of the gym and even the unspoken ones that any member of each public gym should be aware of. Wipe down the equipment, rack your weights, and most importantly, share. Because, I mean, if you could not do all of that, maybe you're not cut out to use a public gym. It wasn't hard to be considerate. Most people got it. If someone needed a set in between yours, you let them. It was just good gym etiquette. But there was one guy who didn't seem to care, Derek. The name alone annoyed me. He was the type who thought the gym revolved around him. Loud, cocky, and utterly oblivious. He hogged the weight rack when it was obvious that there were other people who needed to get their workout done. I was particularly irritated by his behavior. At first, I ignored him. Maybe he would grow out of it, or maybe I would find a better time to work out without having to come face to face with him, but most days, I did not. Derek didn't just hog weights, he made sure everyone knew that they could not do anything to him while he was being an unreasonable individual. He would leave the dumbbells scattered around, scroll through his phone mid-set while the others were waiting for him, or leave the weights higher than most people in the gym could possibly reach. It was like he was trying to say, catch up or get out. And if you try to ask if you could steal equipment from him for a few, you would wish you did not come to the gym that day. All he had to do was follow the unspoken rule, but Derek had clearly never heard of it. For weeks, I gritted my teeth and waited for him to get a clue of the silly things he was doing and make amends. He didn't. Instead, he got worse. And no one had the guts to do anything about it. No one even wanted to try. So it stayed like that for a while longer, till it did not. It had been one of those days where I was stretched thin from work. I couldn't make it to the gym in the morning. I had back-to-back meetings, a pile of deadlines, and barely enough time to eat, let alone work out. By the time I made it to the gym in the evening, I had exactly 20 minutes to squeeze in a session before I had to head home. So my plan was just me, the weights, and my timer on the go. No excuses, no distractions. But of course, Derek was there. And you could say that I was the silly one for thinking I could do things my way when Derek was around. He was in rare form that evening, hogging the entire rack like he was training for the Olympics. Well, more like he was training for war. He had dumbbells of all sizes scattered around him. Everything was so chaotic scattered around him with equipment that no one dared to touch. Derek was juggling everything. Half-hearted curls, loud conversations, and of course, endless scrolling on Instagram. I waited patiently at first, figuring he would notice the growing line of frustrated gym members and step aside. He didn't. When 10 minutes passed, he was still there laughing at memes of all things. I finally spoke up. "Hey man, mind if I grab a dumbbell real quick?" He didn't even look up. There was nothing that would have suggested that he had heard anyone speaking. Then he gave a quick dismissive smirk before he said, "Patience, bro, I'll be done when I'm done." That was it. I was just done with his whole attitude at that particular time. I had a lot on my plate already, and I was not about to allow his god-complex arrogance to ruin what was salvageable of my day, so I left. I didn't have the time to wait till he was done anyway without the time clashing with every other thing waiting on my table. But as I left, I knew in that instance that I was getting pushed past my threshold of holding back. I knew that it was only a matter of time before I eventually lashed out at him about his character. And that's when a plan formed in my head. Simple, sure, but it had to be darn effective, because for someone like Derek, that was the only way to get through to them. The next time I went to the gym, I didn't plan to work out as much as I would on a normal day. Why? Because my major objective was to watch Derek and find out how best I could sabotage him. As Derek strutted around the gym like he owned it, I realized it wasn't just his arrogance that annoyed me. It was that obsession he had that made him always want to be in control of everything that was going on. He just had to be the one in charge while every other person waited on him, and he had a routine that he thrived on. That gave me an idea. Since Derek found it increasingly hard to respect the unwritten rules of the gym, it was time to pay him a little dose of his medicine. I bided my time, watching as he juggled between feeding his ego and going through his Instagram feed. Between his sets, he would wander off to the smoothie stand to chat up whoever was unlucky enough to be nearby. That's when I got into action. The first thing I did was to rearrange the dumbbells in the most confusing way possible. The lightweights got mixed with the heavyweights, and I made sure I scattered the location of the pairs such that both pieces of a pair were not in the same place. And the ones he claimed personally, I took them out of sight completely. People were looking at me, staring actually. My best guess is that they thought I was screwed for messing with Derek's stuff, but I couldn't be bothered. The next thing I did was to swap out the 25 pounds he used for his endless sets of bicep curls in front of the mirror while holding his phone in his face, taking videos of everything, including those that were simply minding their business on their workout schedule. I replaced them with mismatched kettlebells. Through it all, I made sure not to disturb any other person's workout actively, and eventually, I managed to finish up the whole exchange drama before he came in. When Derek strolled back to the weight rack, smoothie in hand, he had his usually annoying smirk firmly on his face. I leaned against the nearby treadmill pretending to stretch. I knew I was running out of time. The minutes I had to work out had been exhausted between waiting on Derek and planning the disarray I did. Yet, I waited. I wanted to see how he would react. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that none of the other gym members would chicken out and rat me out to Derek in my absence. So, I waited. He stopped dead in his tracks. Then I saw his stupid smirk slowly turn into a frown as he scanned the entire gym section. He was quick to realize in that instant that there was something wrong with the placement. He figured that it was different from how he left it, but he was yet to figure out why that was the case. Dumbbells were scattered like puzzle pieces, the plates were mismatched, and his precious 25-pounders were nowhere in sight. "Where's the 25?" he muttered, rifling through the mess. "Why is there a 10 next to a 70? His frustration was visible to everyone, and his loud muttering as he was trying to reorganize the weight simply made the entire thing worse. He grumbled about idiots and amateurs under his breath, but every time he tried to fix one thing, he made another area worse. It was silly to mess with him like that, I know, but it wasn't like he gave us any other choice, and the gym managers were either scared to talk sense into him or couldn't be bothered about what their other members faced as long as there was no damage to their property and the membership fee was paid constantly. Unfortunately, the little mismatching thing I did made it their business. It got better, or should I say worse? Well, that depends on your perspective. At some point, Derek decided he did not allow the missing and scattered weights to disrupt his workout. I mean, he did have a reputation to hold, right? So he did the dumbest thing I could have ever imagined him doing. He decided to push through with what was available. Not even a so-called newbie to the gym would be that stupid, but he grabbed the mismatched dumbbells he could find and he attempted his usual bicep curls, only for the imbalance to send him wobbling. He caught himself just before falling, but not before a loud clang echoed through the gym as one of the weights hit the floor. It brought the entire gym to a standstill. It was like the entire gym was looking and feeling sorry for the embarrassment. Then, suddenly, as though they just realized who it was, the chuckling started. It was underneath, then it became louder and the whole gym erupted in a fist of laughter. As Derek continued his doomed attempt to reclaim his throne, the noise level rose with each clatter of weights and grumbled curse under his breath. It wasn't long before the gym manager, Lisa, finally made her way over. "Derek," she called out, "what's going on here?" Derek looked up, his face flushed with equal parts frustration and embarrassment. "Someone's been messing with the rack," he grumbled, gesturing wildly at the chaos. "I can't find anything in this mess." As he spoke, most parts of the gym was still bubbling with chuckling and smirks. The last thing we heard before Derek threw down the weight he was holding was, "Look, this isn't the first time there's been an issue around you in the weight rack. I think it's best you call it a day. Come back tomorrow when things are calmer." He did not argue, not even a single word. He just threw down the weight and left the gym. So I basically have two takeaways here. One is OP went to a pretty crappy gym because most places that have a guy like Derek, I feel would probably be very motivated to get rid of them because that would almost certainly be scaring away more money than it would be securing Derek's money. Secondly, the best way to make any business do anything that you want them to do is make sure that it affects their bottom line. If it's going to improve their bottom line to do the action, of course, they're probably going to do said action. Just like Derek was doing the opposite, so they had to yeet him out of the building. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.